Hi all. So to start with, we're going to see how to handle the drag and drop events using our Selenium. So when you start working with your drag and drop, you get elements which needs to be dragged from one position or one location and to be dropped to another location. So I'll show you one such application which has a drag and drop functionality here. So if you see this, here there are multiple blocks and multiple columns. So what you're supposed to do is drag a block from one column and drop it inside another column. So for that, let us just go to this developer options. These actions are very easy. Whenever you're working with your Selenium and you want to perform some mouse over actions, I mean to say the mouse events and your keyboard events, the class that we are going to use is our actions class. So this actions class will help you to perform most of the operations that are related to your mouse and your keyboard. So let me first create a new class. Go to new, go to class, and I'll call it as drag and drop public static void main and click on finish. So now let me copy few lines of code and I'm going to navigate to the application's URL. I'm just going to say driver.get and I'm going to navigate to this application's URL. So after I go here, so what am I supposed to do is I'm supposed to find out the source element which needs to be dragged, and I have to find out the destination element where I have to drop it. So what I'll be doing here is I'm going to identify the source element, which is my block 1, and I'm going to identify my destination, which is my block. I'm going to drop it under this block 4. So I'll see how to identify the source and your destination. So first, let me inspect this block 1 here. And if you see this particular block 1 has a header and it has a text, and I'm going to create an XPath to identify that web element. So let me write an XPath for that. And it is h1 text is equal to, within single quotes, I'm going to add the text associated with it. So now how am I going to do? I'm just going to say web element source is equal to driver dot find element by dot XPath. Pass your XPath expression and your source has been identified. So what is the next step? The next step is to identify your destination, correct? So I have to see where am I going to drop it. So the next thing what we'll be doing is we are going to identify the column that we are going to drop it, right? So let me identify this column. So this particular column here has an ID associated with it. So let me identify that here. So I'm just going to say web element destination is equal to driver dot find element by dot ID. So pass your ID directly and you're done. So now what are we going to do is we are going to instantiate an actions object. So with the help of this actions object, we are going to execute this drag and drop functionality. So now how are we going to work with it? We are going to instantiate this actions class. So let me start with it. Actions is equal to new actions. And this particular actions class takes the control of your driver. So when I say it takes the control of your driver, this is going to take the object of your WebDriver type, correct? Because I'll have to use the control of the driver to perform this mouse over and your keyboard actions. Now, once your class has been instantiated, this particular class has all possible methods related to your mouse events and also your keyboard events. So all I'm supposed to do is I'm going to say action dot drag and drop, and you pass your source element and your destination element. And once you're done with this, so one important thing that you have to keep in mind is there are two important methods which will help you perform your operations. One is your build and the second one is your perform. So if you want to execute any method that belongs to your actions class, you are going to invoke a method called as perform. So without invoking the method called as perform, none of your actions from the action class will get executed. So if you have to execute any methods from your actions class, you have to invoke a method called as perform. So the perform is the one which is going to perform all your operations that is related to your mouse and your keyboard. There is a second method called as build. So what does this build method do? Whenever you're trying to perform an operation, so it is actually going to build a set of operations that you want to perform. See, for example, say I need to enter some key and I want it to be in a certain format. For example, say I had to do a combination of your shift and your multiple keys, or I might have to send your control and A. So in this case, how am I going to send it, right? So whenever you're performing more than one operation, you are going to use the method called as build so that the multiple operations will get combined together and it will be triggered as one action. So this is the difference between your build and your perform. So your build basically is to build your set of operations, whereas your perform is to execute that operation. So now, once you have done this, I'm going to show you how this method is going to work. Let me run this program. Do you see this? The block 1, which was in the column 1, has now been dragged to the column 3. So this is all about your drag and drop event. So likewise, we are going to perform your mouse over event as well. So what do you mean by a mouse over event? Whenever you move your cursor to one of your web elements, so a list of options will be given to you, or it is going to perform some operation for you. So now the next thing is mouse over. So I'll tell you the difference between the build and your perform when I show you an example. So once after the mouse over, I'll show you how to perform build. So let me tell you what mouse over event is. Whenever you're trying to perform or whenever you're trying to move your cursor to a particular web element. So when you go to that, so what it does is it is going to give you a list of operations, which means when you focus on a particular web element, only then it is going to give you, or only then it is going to show its functionality. So that kind of web elements can be handled by your mouse over actions, which is using your actions class. So how are we going to work on that? Here is another application. If you see this, there's an application called as Craftsvilla, which has multiple menu here. So what happens is when you just mouse over on a particular web element, you will get a list of elements that are available, after which you can perform operations on any of this particular link. So let us automate this scenario and see how to do it using our actions class. So first, let me create a new class here. Right click, go to new and say go to class. And now what are we going to do is we are going to give a name as mouse over event. So public static void main. So now what I'll be doing is I'm going to copy some few lines of code and drop it here. So now what am I going to do is I'm going to navigate to that application's URL. Once after this, what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to identify this web element, and then I'm supposed to mouse over on that and then click on a particular link. So let me get into the inspect mode. So now what I'll be doing is I'm going to inspect this web element. So it is a link and it has a href. So I'm going to use this href and create a XPath to identify this web element. So what I'll be doing is @href is equal to, so whatever is your value, I'm going to pick it up and I'll be using this. The XPath has identified that particular web element. So now I say web element saris link is equal to driver.findElement by.xpath. Pass your XPath expression. So once you have passed this expression, what am I going to do? I'm going to say instantiate an object of your actions class. Why? Because I'm supposed to mouse over on this particular web element. So how am I going to do that? First, instantiate your actions class object is equal to new actions and pass your control of your driver. So once after I'm done with this, what I'll do is I'll use a method which is move to element, and pass your target element, and then call the method which is your perform. So once after you perform this, what is it going to do? It is going to mouse over on this particular web element. After this, what am I supposed to do here is I'm supposed to click on a particular link. So what I'll be doing is I'm going to inspect this element. So you can use a link text which is available here. So I'll use this web element Georgette sarees is equal to driver dot find element by dot link text. Pass your link text that you copied and then say Georgette sarees dot click. So once after I click on this, I want to confirm whether this particular page has got loaded successfully or not, right? So when I perform this operation, so what is it going to do? It is going to navigate to the next page. So I'm going to check what is happening, guys. I don't think there's a Georgette sarees page yet. So let me try to click on mouse over on a different link here. Okay. Is this application not working by any chance? Well, anyways, we're going to find the title and we're going to print it. So let us do that. This COVID is stopping us from automating things as well. Well, anyways, let me just capture the title. And since we already know that it is routing it to the home page itself, we have to get the title of the home page itself. So I'm just going to print this title and we are done. So now once you have performed this operation, it is going to navigate to that respective page and you should be able to see a title which gets captured and being printed on our console. So let me run this program and just observe the perform operation. I mean to say the mouse over operation it is going to perform. So observe the screen now. See, it has mouse over and it is going to click on a particular link. So once after it gets clicked, so you can see the processing symbol there. And it goes back to the title and it is going to print it. So if you see here, you should be able to, once after this has been done, the page gets loaded. So it is going to capture the title of the web page and it is going to print it on the console. So now the next operation that we are going to perform is your press and hold. So what we'll be doing is I'm going to show you how to combine multiple operations. I mean to say multiple events here. So what I'll be doing is I'm going to press a shift key and I'm going to type something like this. So what happens when you press a shift key and type some other keys? So all the characters I type after I press the shift key is going to be in your capitals. It is going to be in your uppercase. So this is what I'll be doing, and after which I'm going to double click on that so that it is going to copy the whole text. So let me show you how to build these set of operations and perform it as a single operation here. Let me just come in these lines of code and I'll show you how to work with your search. So now I'm going to inspect this particular web element and then here it is. It has a name called as Q. So let me identify it. So web element search box is equal to driver dot find element by dot name, and I'm going to pass the name. So now what I'll be doing is I'm going to first construct a action. In order to construct an action, I am going to use something called as your action interface. So what I'll be doing here is I'm going to start setting up the action interface and then I'm going to start adding multiple actions here. So what are the actions that I'm going to build is, first I'm going to say, let me instantiate your actions object. So action is equal to new actions of driver. So using this action object, what I'll be doing is I'm going to start creating multiple actions here. So what are the actions that I'm going to perform is, first I'm going to press on this shift key. So there is a method called as your search string. So this is what I'll be doing. Now it should not come. So I say action dot. So what is the first operation that I'm going to do? I'm going to say key press, right? Or your key down. First you're supposed to key press. I mean to say key down your keyboard. And then I'm going to say on your search box, and the key that I'm going to press is your keys dot shift. Okay, which is the key that I'm pressing? I'm going to press this shift key. After which I'm going to send the keys. So you can send whichever keys you want. I'm just going to say saris. So once I'm done with this, what I'll be doing is I'm going to key up, right? I have to release the key. So I say key up. So you can say which key needs to be released. And then again, I say keys dot shift. So once after you're done with it, I'm just going to perform this double click operation. So double click operation is also going to be on the same web element. So after this, what I'm going to say is build this action. Do you understand what is it doing? It is going to perform a build action. Search string to action. Why is it taking it like this? Let me import this actions interface. Hold on. It has got imported from your some other package. Now let me import it from your Selenium interactions. Now what I have done here is I have combined multiple actions and I created it as a single action. So this is what your build is going to do. What is your build going to do is your build is going to combine multiple operations into a single action. And this single action will be executed using your perform method. Now got the difference between your build and your perform? The name itself says build is to build an action, perform is to execute an action. So now if you want to perform this action, you just say search string dot perform, which means I'm executing it. Let me execute this and show it to you. So it loaded. Do you see this? When you double click, it has selected that particular text. So what is this TestNG? When you expand this TestNG is nothing but your test next generation. So this TestNG is actually a unit testing tool. What do you mean by unit testing? Is the initial test that you're supposed to perform on the piece of code that you have written. So now, why do we use TestNG or unit testing tool in our Selenium is not just for your unit testing purpose, but we do have other advantages of your TestNG. So one thing is the execution of your test cases, and the second one is your reporting purpose. So what actually your TestNG does is this particular TestNG does not follow the legacy way of executing your test cases. So how do you execute a class? I mean, a typical Java project. So how do you execute a set of lines of code? What is the execution point of a Java class? So it is main method. So what are we going to do is we are going to create a public static void main method and we are going to execute our set of code. See, for an example, whenever you're working with the real-time application, what happens is, so you will have a minimum of 1,000 test cases that you're going to create. I mean to say, these are manual test cases. Now, when you're trying to convert these manual test cases into test scripts, you might come up with at least 80 test scripts that you're going to create. So now, how am I going to execute this 800 test script is, though you have created methods like test case 01, test case 02, so at the end of the day, if you want to execute them, you have to call these methods under the main method. Only then these methods get executed. So now, irrespective of having something in your main method, I mean, in this scenario, you will have a minimum of 800 to 850 lines of code in your main method. Don't you think this is not an easy way to handle a main method, or it is not the practical way of handling a test case? Is it a practical way of handling a test case? A main method which contains only your method call. At the end of the day, we don't get any execution report. At the end of the day, we will be not sure of which method has got failed and which line of code has been stopped. And how am I going to restart my execution? For example, say, at a point where it has executed some 450 test cases, and now I have to continue with my rest of the test cases. Or in real time, what happens is, if you have around 800 test cases, so for example, say 10% of it got failed. So your 90% has got passed and 10% has not got failed. How am I re-execute only the failed test cases? Is it possible for me to use the same template and continue with it? Obviously not. I have to either restart the whole framework or I have to comment out all your failed test cases. Again, how will I get to know that there is a failed test case in my program? It is very difficult for me to identify because the execution stops then and there. That is one point. Even if you have tried to handle it some way, for example, say, even if you have tried to handle it using your try and catch block, so you're going to write it somewhere. You have to create a report by yourself. So all these things doesn't seem to be easy for us to execute my test cases using the legacy way. And that is the main reason why we go with something called as your TestNG. So this test next generation is a unit testing tool which will help us to perform or which will help us to execute multiple test cases at a time and also generate reports based on the execution status of your test cases. So I'll tell you all the do's and don'ts that you're supposed to be followed when you start using your TestNG. The very first thing is stop using the system.out.println. You're not supposed to use your system.out.println, but instead start using a method called as your reporter.log. The second thing is stop using your main method and start using your test classes. Okay, or you can say you can start using your test methods. Now, the third one is you're never supposed to use your default packages. It is always mandatory for you guys to use your user-defined packages, which means you're supposed to explicitly create packages like this and then create classes within. Why? Because when you're executing your classes using your TestNG, you are going to provide a fully qualified class name. Now, what do you mean by a fully qualified class name? A fully qualified class name is a part of your complete package followed by the class. So since we execute a class based on this class name, so it is mandatory for you guys to create a package, a user-defined package, and then within that you are supposed to add your class. So these are the three do's and don'ts that we're supposed to follow when we start using our TestNG. So first, let us see how to install TestNG. So there are two ways of installing your TestNG. The first way is you go to help and there's something called as your Eclipse Marketplace. So now go to Eclipse Marketplace and then it is going to bring up a wizard for you. And under your find, you're going to search for your TestNG. So just type TestNG and hit enter. So once you hit enter, you get something like this, which is called as TestNG for Eclipse. So if TestNG is not installed on your Eclipse, you will have an install button like this. So all you're supposed to do is click on install and then continue with the default options, which is install now. And then if it asks you to perform some next or whatever, so continue with that and click on finish. So this is one of the way to install your TestNG. Now, if you don't find your TestNG under your Eclipse Marketplace, there's a second way of installing your TestNG. So here what you're supposed to do is go to your help again, and then here you go to something called as your install new software. Once you go to this install new software, there's a link for your TestNG here. Okay, let me give you that link. Oh, this link has been removed. So this is your link that you can use. So what you're supposed to do is paste one of this link on your install new software wizard where you see something called as your work with. Once you enter that path on that work with, it is going to identify the TestNG that is available. So it gets listed here. So all you're supposed to do is you're going to choose this option. That is, you're going to click on this checkbox and then click on next. Wait until it gets installed successfully and then click on your finish. This is all you're supposed to do for your installation. So how will you come to know that your TestNG has been installed successfully or not is now when you right click on your project, this is going to give you an option called as your TestNG here. Do you see this? This TestNG option will now be available once after your TestNG has got added to your Eclipse. So this is how you can confirm that your TestNG has been installed. So once after the installation is done, now we are supposed to convert our project into our TestNG project. How are we going to convert it into a TestNG project? A very easy conversion. So you're going to right click on your Selenium, go to TestNG. Now there are two options. One is create TestNG class and the second one is convert to TestNG. So my first operation would be converting this into TestNG. So I click on convert to TestNG, and here this is going to get me something called as your refactoring tab. So which will ask me to generate the testng.xml file. Now, what is this testng.xml? This testng.xml is the driver file from where your execution will be derived. So you're going to drive your execution from your testng.xml file. So you're going to add the name of your project and the scope of your framework that you have created. So what do you mean by suite here is the name of the suite is going to be the name of your application, which is under test, or it can be the name of your project that you have created here. So you know, how do you name the project? The name of the project is going to be the name of your application under test, and the same thing is going to be provided here. So since my project is Selenium, I am going to name it as Selenium. Now, what do you mean by test name? The test name here is going to tell the scope of your project. Okay, when I say scope, why is this particular project created for? Is it created for the regression testing scope? Is it created for the functional test scope? Is it created for your smoke test scope? Or is it created for any other scope? Is what you're going to specify when it comes to your test name. So I'm going to say regression, right? Because we usually create a framework for the regression purpose. So I'm going to name it as regression. So once after this is done, what I'll be doing is I'm going to click on next, and then I'm going to click on finish. So once after I click on that, you can see a testng.xml that gets generated under your project. This is what has to be done as an initial setup for your TestNG. Now, once after your testng.xml has been installed, let me double click on that testng.xml. So when you open this testng.xml, this is how your testng.xml will get displayed. So by default, it will go to your XML format. I mean to say the design format. But what you're supposed to do is, if you want to make changes to your TestNG, you have to enter the source of it. So how am I going to enter the source? At the bottom, you can see something called as a source tab here. So this is where you're supposed to click. So when you click on that, it is going to take you in your actual XML format. So this is the designer TestNG, and this is the source of your TestNG. Now, whatever you have added, the Selenium suite and the test name has been added here. And if you want to execute multiple classes, I'll show you how to add them. But before that, we have to start creating the packages, we have to start creating the classes, and then we can execute them. So let me now create a package and start creating a TestNG class. So whenever you're creating a TestNG class, so what do you mean by a TestNG class is, any class which contains a test method is called as your test class or your TestNG class. Now, what do you mean by a test method? A method which is annotated with @test is called as a test method. So what is a test method? A test method is an executable block of code itself. So these methods need not be invoked, right? You need not call that method, unlike your legacy way. So the moment you annotate a method with @test, it is clear that it is going to be a executable block of code. So now how are we going to create a test method is, so add an annotation called as @test. Now I'm going to create a method, public void display, right? Some sample method that I'm creating. And I told you, instead of system.out.println, I'm going to use something called as your reporter.log statement, right? So I'm going to use this reporter.log, and I'm going to say this is the first TestNG class. Okay, this is what I'll be doing. But now if you see, there are @test, which is not got, which doesn't know where it is being imported from. and reporter is not being imported from anywhere. So how are we going to handle these is just by converting a project into TestNG, you will not be able to use all the methods that is available in our TestNG library. See, what we did is if we wanted to use our Selenium standalone jar, we added the Selenium standalone jar to our build path. So it created it as a referenced libraries. And now you're able to use all your WebDriver methods and web element methods and stuff. So likewise, even your TestNG has a library that gets added to your project. So you have to add it to your project if you have to use all its methods and whatever is available within it. So how are we going to add it? Right click on your project again, go to build path and say configure build path. Okay, once you go to the configure build path, you're supposed to go under libraries, say add library, choose TestNG from the list and then click on next and then click on finish. Now apply and close. So now you should be able to see the TestNG library that gets added to your project. Now you should be able to import your test from your TestNG annotations and reporter.log from your org.testng. So now you should be able to execute this particular class. This is one way of creating your class. How am I going to execute this particular class? I am going to use TestNG.xml in order to execute this. So what I'll be doing is within my test block. So I'm going to add a tag called as class. So now what does this classes do? This class can in turn have multiple class that needs to be executed. So what is going to be the part of the class that I'm going to specify? Like I said, it is going to be the fully qualified package, which is the combination of your package followed by your class name. This is what you're supposed to specify. So this is how you're going to add your class name inside your testng.xml. So once you add this here, you should be able to execute it. So we are always going to execute the TestNG with the help of your TestNG test method, right? So now when you click on this run button, so you get this information, run as TestNG suite, right? So click on this and click on OK. All right. So now this is going to execute your code and you should be able to see the information that gets printed on your console. Let's wait until this gets completed. Now you can see your console here, which says which TestNG version you have been working with. And here is your result of your execution. What does the result here say is, so the name of the project or the suite was Selenium. So total tests run is 1, failures are 0, and skips are 0. So at the same time, you can see something called as results of running suite. So which displays a beautiful representation of what you have done. So if you see, this is the project. So below which you have a regression suite, which means a regression test that you have created. Within that, there's a class called as com.edureka.testng.myfirsttestng class, within which you have a method called as display. So total number of tests passed is 1, total number of tests failed is 0, skipped is 0. And if you see here, it says test 1 out of 1 and methods was 1. So 772 milliseconds is what was the time that it took in order to execute it. And since there's no failure, you don't see anything under your failure exception. If there is a failure, you should be able to see your failure exception here along with your exception message. So these things which is being displayed on your console are called as your console reports. So these console reports are only for your reference. So where am I going to see these reports is, you will be able to see it for the very first time when you refresh your project, because there will be a new folder that gets added. So you're going to refresh your project for the first time and you should be able to see a folder with the name test output. So how do I refresh it? Right click on the project and then say refresh. So here is your test output folder which has got generated. So your TestNG here generates 2 important reports. One being your emailable report.html, and the second one is your index.html. So let me go to this location and show you how these reports look. So under my test output folder, I should be able to see this index.html and emailable report.html. So let me open it with browser. Since these are HTML files, so these need to be opened with your browser here. So let me open it likewise. So this is your TestNG report, which is your emailable report.html, where you should be able to see all your information. And here is your index.html. So this is how it keeps indexing all the options that is available. I mean to say all the information that is available. Now if you see, the test name is regression. The test case passed is 1, skipped is 0, failed is 0, the time it took, and if there are groups included or you're excluded. And then again, you have a detailed explanation of what was the time it has taken and stuff. And here it says com.edureka.testng.myfirst.testng class display. So display is the method. What do you mean by a framework, right? How will you execute your framework? Or what do you mean by your execution? I mean to say automation. So very clearly, it is unattended execution. Whenever you try to execute your frameworks, so what happens is with your automation frameworks, you run it and you leave home. By the time you come back the next day, the results would be ready. If you do a system.out.println, what does it do? It is going to print all the statements on your console. So if you're sitting in front of your computer and if something gets typed on the console, only then it matters. When there's nobody, when it is an unattended execution, so does it make sense for you to print anything on the console? Does it make sense to print something on the console? Obviously not, because there's nobody who's going to sit and see what's happening. So instead what we do is we are going to use a reporter.log statement. So this reporter.log statement is going to add all your statements inside your reports that gets generated. So the next day when you come back, you should be able to see all the messages that has got added as a part of your report here. So these are the two reports that gets generated. Now, if you want to see information about each of this link, you can click on each one of them. So this is how your testng.xml look. There's one test, right? 0 groups. There's the time taken, and then reporter output, and then your ignored methods, if you have ignored any methods, and the chronological view of your classes. And there's one method out of which one pass, and the passed method is your display. This is how your report gets generated when you execute a test case using your TestNG. Likewise, can I have multiple test methods in a single TestNG class? Is it possible for me to have any number of test methods in my TestNG class? Yes, we can have any number of test methods in a single TestNG class. So I'm just going to create a demo class here, something like this. So for example, say I'm going to create a class like user module script. So from applications perspective, so what are the operations that you can perform on a user? I mean, there is a module called as user module, which will give you a provision to perform a lot of operations on this. Like you can create a user, you can edit the user's information, and you can delete the user. So likewise, you will have n number of operations that you can start performing. So let me create 3 test methods here. So look at this. How do I create it? @test. So public void create user, correct? And then I say reporter.log, and I'm going to add some statement. User created successfully. Some message I'm going to give. So now let me import this. Likewise, I'm going to add another one. @test public void edit user. So I say reporter.log and add your message like this. User details have been edited. Some message. Again, another one. @test public void delete user. Then I say reporter.log and I'm going to say user deleted. So this is what I'll be doing as a part of your multiple execution. I mean to say multiple test methods creation. So what I'll be doing is I'm going to add this class, which is your user module scripts, in my testng.xml file, and then I'm going to execute it. So let us see the execution sequence of your TestNG method. Let me run this TestNG suite, click on OK. So here is your execution, which is being done. And if you go to this results of running suite, can you see this? It has executed your create user, your delete user, and your edit user. So based on this and based on the class that you have created, what is the default sequence of your TestNG method? Did you observe the screen? Look at this. So I have create user, and then I have the edit user, and then I have the delete user. But what is the execution sequence here? First create, and then your delete, and then your edit user. So the answer is alphabetical order, correct? So irrespective of whatever is the sequence that you create your test cases, so by default, TestNG is going to execute the test cases in the alphabetical order. But if you see this, my requirement is first I have to create a user, and then I'm going to edit the user, and then I'm going to delete the user, right? That is how the actual sequence should work in real time. So if the user is not created, there's no point in trying to edit it. And if you have already deleted the user, there's no point in trying to edit the user who doesn't exist at all. So if I have to create or if I have to perform a valid set of operations, I am supposed to execute them in a proper priority or in a proper sequence. Now, if I have to change the sequence, I'm going to use two different ways. There are two different ways in your TestNG to change the sequence of your execution. The very first one is your priority. So what is this priority? This priority is an attribute that you're going to provide to your @test annotation. So by default, the priority of all the methods is going to be 0. So by default, 0 is going to be the priority of all the methods. Now, if you want to change the priority, you have to just pass it as an argument to your @test annotation. Now, this is what I'll be doing. So priority is equal to 1, priority is equal to 2, and here I say priority is equal to 3. So now when I run this class, so now we should be able to see the change in your execution sequence. So now do you see this? It says create user, and then your edit user, and then your delete user. So clear how to add a priority? There's a lot more to know about your priority. So now your priority will always be in your ascending order. So whenever you're trying to add a priority to a test case, your priority should always be in a ascending order. So like I said, your priority is going to take up only integer values. It can be only your positive numbers and your negative numbers. So no decimal values are allowed, and no variable names are allowed. So if you have a type of integer as well, even if you have a variable and then you add a variable here, this is not allowed. No string values are allowed. The only thing that is allowed is your integer values that you can provide to your priority. Okay, this is all about your priority. Let me summarize it. Priority is going to change the sequence of execution of your test cases. And priority accepts only integer values, and priority is always assigned in the ascending order. I mean to say priority will always be executed in the ascending order. Priority takes both positive integers and negative integers, and the default priority of any test method is 0. And when two test methods have the same priority, it again defaults to the alphabetical order of execution amongst those methods, and no decimal values are allowed, no variables are allowed, and no string values are allowed as a value for your priority. So this is all about your priority. Thank you so much.